So Lisle, this is your first time at the Goose.
Yeah.
First impressions?
First impressions, one of the things that has struck me has been how typically when you come into a space like a conference or a festival, there's a bit of a sort of celebrity culture in terms of the big name speakers who come in, and typically they come in on a big stage and speak from a podium and then go backstage and we never see them again. And so here we are all quite literally like sweating it out under tents and I think there's a sense of solidarity in that we're all here to kind of listen and share, and it really breaks that sense of like celebrity culture down, and we're all just kind of walking around, and I love that sort of egalitarian exchange, and that we truly are just this community that's coming together to reinvigorate one another.
And that's a challenging thing that strikes me because on the one hand there is this ethos of equity that needs to be part and parcel of what we do.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, the reality is for some folk, if we have unfettered access to them, they will not have agency of their own, and that's not just either, right?
Yeah.
So trying to find that balance.
Totally.
And we're not always the best at judging that ourselves too.
Yeah.
So it does help, I think, to have a little bit of people going, they need to move to the next thing.
Totally, and I think that's important, but I think part of it is just being able to, I think more of what I'm interested in is just the setup, the staging.
Yeah.
I sat, what felt like an arm's length away from Ruby Sales as she was speaking yesterday, and that was just so powerful to just be in the presence of her wisdom and what she shared in that space, and that's very different than sitting in a big fancy auditorium with her up on a stage.
Right. And then being whisked out the back door and never heard from again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I may not run into her as much on the streets, on the gravel path, but being able to have that more kind of intimate connection, I think, is what makes this really unique so far.
And then you got to do some co-creation with her, and you've been doing some of that here at the festival. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, so I'm one of the community artists, so I'm co-creating during some of the speakers. So that means that I am working on a live painting, a live piece of art, and so that's designed to be this kind of multi-sensory proclamation in the midst of all these speakers who are sharing their content and their ideas. And I've been working on a piece that's an abstract landscape, a big open sky, and I've been thinking a bit about the dawning of a new day and what that really looks like, and so this kind of breakthrough of light and color and beauty in the midst of this breakthrough of ideas and stories and narratives that are so necessary. I think personally the effect of a space like Wild Goose for me is that I live in I can be very comfortable in my cushions of privilege and comfort in these kind of post-election weary times. And so I think spaces like this reignite my own fire and push me out of that complacency and that sense, that tendency to move toward apathy and my own sense of weariness about the world that I can so easily, because of my privilege, stay an arm's length away from. And so I think, again, maybe that's part of the intimacy of connecting with these speakers and these people that are sharing, is that, it's almost like we're coming face to face with one another, and there's no running away from that. And so I think I'm still processing a lot of what I'm hearing and what I'm taking home with me, but I think that it's a reinvigoration for me to step beyond that, which is something I crave and desperately need, for sure.
Is there something that you have heard or experienced that has been part of that challenge, that reinvigoration? I'm sure there is, but if there's maybe one example of that.
Yeah. So, so much. Like I said, everything Ruby Sales said was like, Tony Campolo yesterday knew his audience and knew it well, and at one point charged us to truly be the Christians that we proclaim to be in terms of seeing the face of Jesus in everyone. And he gave us a pretty direct charge to imagine that for Donald Trump. And he said, there are about 150 people here. What would it look like if each of you wrote a letter? Not necessarily condoning his actions, but saying you are, you share the image of Christ, the image of God in you. And that means something to me as a Christian.
Right.
And I can't deny that.
Wow.
And so, of course, that's convicting for someone like me.
Right.
Who feels so, I'm not even a person who has been particularly harmed by his policies and his actions and the policies of his leadership, but I feel the trauma that reverberates out from the world because of it, and so to be able
right, and then to still be able to recognize this is someone made in the image of God.
Yeah, I'm still working on that.
That's really hard. It's really hard. Yeah. It's the hardest thing about Jesus saying, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Yeah. And when we're in that position of privilege where we haven't been particularly directly affected by policies, we have people that we love and know and cherish have been deeply hurt.
Communities that are connected to us and that we impact with our actions and our choices, and
So let's talk a little bit about the Goose as a movement and the possibilities that it represents. So we're here for a couple of days. Yeah. And then we go home. Yeah. What happens then?
It's a great question. I think that, typically it's really easy to have some sort of mountaintop experience and then to come down from the mountaintop literally as we're in the mountains. And kind of lose some of that fire and go back into the rhythm of our normal daily lives and let it kind of evaporate a bit.
Dissipate. Yeah.
How can Wild Goose continue that fire, that energy? I'm new to this community. This is my first time here, and so I'm curious to see what that looks like, to be honest, because I don't really know. But I do think that the majority of people who are here are people who are very integrated into their communities, into their spheres of influence. That's their life's work. Yeah. And so I think that, in a lot of ways, this is just a continuum of energy and movement that's already happening in all these different spheres, and we're all kind of converging here to share, to cross-pollinate, to reinvigorate, and then it's kind of moving outward. So I hope that energy continues, and I hope that it continues within me as well. Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because I think about these kind of mountaintop experiences, and I've had some conversations around this, that there is the power of memory, right? So you remember the mountaintop experience and you carry that with you. And I think it's also about figuring out how we recognize the sacred is happening even when we're not on the mountaintop, right? Yep. So one of the things that I constantly hear at Wild Goose and hope is lived out is this idea of you are who you are and celebrate who that is, because that's who God has created you to be. It's a radical acceptance of self. And so
radical only because of our culture and because of our
it's
like not actually that radical if you read scripture.
Right. Well, sure, but who has time for that? No. So but at the same time, that to me is also a way of saying there is sacredness in the everyday. It's not just on the mountaintop. The mountaintop may be the reinvigoration, but make sure that you have ways to reinvigorate you and recognize the sacredness that's happening around you.
Absolutely.
And that's a challenge because there's an intensity of these experiences. Yeah. So maybe it's, I don't know, is it to make sure that you are connecting with people who are goose-ish when you're back in your own context? What does it look like to recognize that sacred in the everyday?
Gosh, I think Barbara Brown Taylor, who's here this year, and it sounds like she's here most years, is one of my greatest teachers in that. There's the Altar in the World kind of idea. The Altar in the World is one of the most pivotal books for me in my own faith formation. And, she talks, there's this beautiful quote where she talks about, to dig in the earth, to eat around a table with friends, like to break bread. Like this requires no lucid theology, no great grand doctrines or anything. It just is this is what we can't deny is sacred, though. And so I think she is one of my greatest teachers in recognizing that those simple actions, these two, are sacred. whether for me it's creating, this act of creating that I engage almost every day in my work and my own ministry, or just something as simple as coming home to my own garden and like sifting my hands through the dirt, or reaching out to a new person that I've never met, seeing the image of God in a stranger just on the street, someone I may not even interact with but see from afar. Like, these are the moments that are sacred. And she talks about this image of water on stone, these drops of water, that water is actually what shapes stone over time.
Right. A drop at a time. Awesome.
BBT, I'm painting. I'm holding out to paint.